you to the organizers for inviting me and just having this opportunity to talk a little bit and reminisce about the good old times. Prior to this event, this World Bank IMF meeting and this protest that we staged, Speaker's Corner was then up and about already, and I think Martyn very cheekily titled this whole thing called Speaker's Corner. Because at that time, Speaker's Corner or Hong Park was still a venue where you had to register. You saw the clip, but then you could not do anything like what we're able to do today, and that is even to to shout out slogans, chants. You could not gesticulate. You could only speak without any voice enhancement equipment. And I thought that was a human rights joke at the time, right? So having that Speaker's Corner, that had its antecedents as well. Just about 1999, I think it was just around then, towards the end of it, there was no Hong Park, there was no Speaker's Corner. So what I did was then, at that time, picked up a little, at that time, you just had those small microphone speakers, portable speakers, and it's a clip-on mic. And I made my way down to Raffles Place. And I just issued a press statement and said that I was just going to go back, give a lunchtime talk. Anyway, the police all came out and said that if I did that, they would come down and arrest me and prosecute me. But I went down anyway, and I was really a nervous wreck at the time, not so much because the police was going to be around. I was really afraid that nobody would show up. And really be in a pickle. But in any case, a sizable crowd was there, and I just talked about HDB prices, and sounds very familiar nowadays. And then I told the crowd right there, I'll be back same time, same place. Next week, the following week, and I did that again, and a bigger crowd showed up right now. So it was that then generated a bit of conversation, and I remember there was a flurry of articles in Straits Times forum, and people were questioning, saying, yeah, why can't we have a free speech venue? But of course not before really, knocking me down and saying I was a troublemaker and so on and so forth. But what happened was that following that there was the World Economic Forum, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and then the late William Sapphire, columnist at New York Times, he had buttonholed Lee Kuan Yew and asked him, well, why can't you guys have this, have a little bit more liberalism in Singapore? I beg your pardon, just more liberal state in Singapore, and to my shock, Lee Kuan Yew says, maybe, why not, and that kind of thing. So he came back and decided to say, well, let's have this place called Speaker's Corner, and that was it. Then what happened was that they didn't allow all these things that I was telling you about, protest and so on, and that's when we staged this WB IMF. And following that, Goh Chok Tong was then taken over as Prime Minister, said they would liberalize the rules to allow some of the activities that were able to do that today. So more of the story is that you've got to constantly be there to push boundaries to make sure that we progress as a society and win back the rights that have been taken away from us for so many decades.
What are your thoughts?
Okay, let's first look at the laws. So after this protest, they passed the Public Order Act, and to restrict further the ability to protest. Remember what Dr. Chee said, there's only 4 of us, not 5, right? So back then, in 2006, you can actually, in a group of less than 5 or something like that, you can actually walk in assembly. But then Public Order Act came in and said that no procession at all, every procession needs a police permit, and they don't give. And Jolovan and the police applied for such permits before, and the police openly said that they won't issue such licenses. And then now And then the part of that was amended by some of them even more to restrict protest. To even say that even one-man protest is illegal. Yeah, that's a situation that this one precipitated. But on the film side, what I did with my 3 films was to liberalize the Films Act. Now they kind of allow political films as long as it's not like a political advertisement during the elections. Yeah, although the law doesn't say it, but they legally now they allow political films like the Workers' Party, SDP, already. So that part is liberalized.
Yeah, I always see this as a work in progress. It never ends. You'll fight for your liberty, you'll fight to retain what's meaningful in your citizenship. That work is never done. Right? And right after I remember having attended some multiple court cases regarding these protests. I remember telling some people, I think Martyn was there, if I'm not mistaken, Alex Au was just around there. I'm not sure Alex is here today. But in any case, we had a discussion, and I just told them at some point, what we'll need to do is to, our strategy included one, just to make sure that we won over people who were willing to listen and to believe. And one of them was right here, Jolovan, correct? Because very soon after, you remember, Jolovan carried out his own protests. Albeit also attracting bringing a lot of trouble to his own convenience, if you will. But that's the whole idea, you see. Then Jolovan now transmits it to the next generation of people who are willing to stand up. And I'm talking about those, that group there, that walked all the way to Istana to deliver that protest over the Gaza war. And this is what I mean for us. And before me, there were people, J.B. Jarrett, the late J.B. Jarrett, very courageously stood up against the regime at that time. And all this happened, mind you, before the age of social media, before the age of reforms. So we had no way of documenting what we did. Martyn was a handheld camera at that time. I think the only thing that was available to us at that time was YouTube, and that was just about it. But then times change, technology changes, and that's where I think you play a very important role in safeguarding what's rightful to us. What is meaningful to us to be called a citizen of Singapore? What, just to hold a passport so we can go overseas and have a good time, and then come back, exercise that vote once every 4 years? No. Your citizenship is what gives you that right. And it's written into the Constitution, our Constitution. The right to assemble, the right to speak, the right to associate. And it's not a privilege. It's not something which the government confers upon us. It is what belongs to us. And when the government restricts us, it has taken away that right that belongs to us. And so in the exercise, when we stand up and sing Majulah Singapura, just also remember, it was the exercise of citizens at that time that won the right for us to be independent today, so that today we don't sing God Save the King. We sing Majulah Singapura. So that's what it means to us. So let's continue to even though we may take one step back, we take 2 steps forward, and as I said, I think we are making progress, slowly, no doubt, but very surely we are making progress, and I just want to encourage everybody to continue not to give up that fight. I guess if you don't calculate in terms of cost benefit, because it doesn't make sense, especially in terms of monetary value, right? Think of it in this way: what's going to cost you will also cost the PAP. Correct? And I'll give you one very good example. Before this whole thing, I said Speaker's Corner was then liberalized. We gave more room for it. And I remember my jaw just dropped when I read one day this report saying that Goh Chok Tong, at that time he was Prime Minister, said we have to liberalize. Why? Because if we don't, if we keep doing this, we will lose you, meaning he was talking to young folks at that time. And to this day, I can tell you, young Singaporeans are still living in Singapore because they just cannot tolerate the kind of very straight-jacketed kind of society. And the government knows that. So as much as you have to pay the penalty that costs, the cost of your inconvenience of having to go to court and so on, and when you pay a fine, frankly speaking, right? For me, I went to prison because I wasn't willing to cooperate with them, and I said I'd rather go to prison than pay this fine, and so I did. But every time you do something like this, you grab the microphone, and it's yours. And for that episode, you can tell Singaporeans, educate them, and tell them what it truly means to be a citizen of this country. And the government, as much as Shanmugam right now is telling you all sorts of nonsense about this, and they are listening. And they are very careful in what they continue to do to you. Okay, so, but if you leave one person going out there and standing by themselves, yeah, well, they're going to overcome you very easily. But when you stand up as a group, and you tell them you won't accept this oppression and this kind of very repressive kind of state, they will sit up and they will listen and they will concede, because at some point Singapore has to move forward. We are one of the very few countries that in this part of the world that continues to run this kind of society where even one lone person cannot stand outside and says, I don't like what the government is doing. It's madness in this day and age. So just be mindful of that even as we are facing with the government, we continue to be respectful of society, to be respectful of authority, but not be fearful of it. That's the difference between a mature, sophisticated society that thinks for itself, that is able to pull Singapore forward and not continue to languish in what we've been doing in 1950s, 60s, 70s, that kind of situation. The world has changed. We must adapt to that change. If not, we will get left behind and will become irrelevant.
So how would you respond to, like I was just the other day, my mom was telling me, no use one, you cannot win. Yeah, so how do you respond to critics who say you're just banging your head against the wall?
That story is that, right, prior to 20, when was, 20, what year was that? I've forgotten already, but I know it was in September that they formed, September, the year I've forgotten. But just take 6 months, a year, prior to when our Speaker's Corner was established, right? And I tell you that one day we will have this free speech venue. You know, people will laugh you out of the room. But it did happen. It is right before you, you see it for your own eyes that things can change. And I can tell you times have changed, right? Again, years before, if you said that Lee Hsien Loong and his brother and sisters would have this, oh my goodness, seismic kind of fight, you know, nobody would have believed this, right? But things change. And things do change for the better if only we will put ourselves out into and says, I want to be counted to, I want to be part of it, I want to be that change maker, I want to make history, and things will change and change for the better.
Okay. I'm going to ask Martyn to
Really through from one year to another. But if you look at it through a span of time, that's difference is there and night. I'll tell you this because I've seen that change in them. That years ago, whenever you talked about government and you talk about, you know, Lee Kuan Yew, everybody drops 1 decibel lower, right? You know, you can't say this and that. But nowadays, that has morphed to the point that I think we can openly call out the ministers who, don't quite make sense to us. And I think that even on the ground, I've seen some YouTube, some interviews with people today on the street. They will tell you things like, openly tell you, hey, that's not quite right. And I just saw one, if I'm not mistaken, just a couple of days ago, and this guy Kim Jong was out there walk about, and says, how are you? And it's just not so good. Your vouchers and this is not enough. So it is, and I know that it's very cliche to say that sometimes the government is our servant, and like fire is a good servant but a terrible, terrible master, right? So we have that embedded in our minds and tell them that the people are the boss. You tell that often enough, and you act upon it, the government will get the message, and that's where we want, where the ruling party, the government serves the people, and not vice versa. So there is a change, and if only because we have all been emboldened by technology, even just for that, I think that's a big plus already. Let's continue to use this technology and continue to be bold and to make sense, to reason, to be logical, and just to stick on facts and figures. And I think David Portmore will become something about Asian history. And we'll go right on our side, so don't worry about making sure that you have that, that your views made known on the social media.
The devastating effects of laws like Portmore is not so much how it targets one or two person, it's how much chilling effect it creates among the community. So I always tell people, don't self-censor yourself. Especially if you're an artist, it's very demeaning to self-censor yourself. Just put your work out there, or start writing, start documenting first. Yeah, then we can all come together and help you out with this. If they're bringing police trouble or whatever. But shouldn't self-censor themselves because one or two fellas got into Portmore trouble. Yeah.
It's very, very quickly moving up from there. Just one point that I want to make in the world, in social activism, in political activism, any kind of activist work, the worst thing is to feel that you're very isolated and you're no single voice out there. So whenever you see somebody getting Portmore or getting into trouble because they've exercised their constitutional right, human right, political right in Singapore, make sure you rally around that person. It's not hard, right? Send them a message, tell them, I see what you did. I'm here to lend you my support, and if we need to be, let's meet up, but if not, we're always getting together as a group, and that is what PAP is terribly, terribly afraid of.
Yes, the reaction, I think the people's reaction to when somebody's being targeted is important. It's like when Kokila was also Portmore recently, a bunch of us, 30 of us decided to come together and repost the post that she was Portmore. Yeah, so this kind of resistance is brilliant. Yeah. Okay, one more question. I have time for oh my goodness.
Where that whole idea has come from, right? From leaders. I've tried to make this point. Recently, there was on social media certain sources that made some videos that were very disparaging of me and the SDP. And then I think one of our traditional media asked us, are you going to take action? Is this the family tree and so on? My response to them was, of course not. Meaning, but do I agree with that person putting out that kind of malicious kind of information? No, I don't. But the whole process then is to demonstrate the kind of leadership we'd like to see in Singapore, right? To tell them, in your exercise of your freedom of speech, let's stay away from being malicious and being sensationalistic. And all this is education. And I believe it will take time. It will take time. We will have to find our own level. But I think that Singapore started from such a low base, and it will have to build up, right? But at some point, it will find its own level, rather than at this stage to keep self-censoring They said, oh, because we're so afraid that we don't want to get there. And I keep making the same point, right? Boats are safer in the harbor, but that's not what boats are made of. They're made for. And that's why I keep telling Singapore people, go out. You're human beings. You live only once. And that's not an exaggeration, right? What do you want to do? In your short, even if I give you go up to 90, you only get to live once. What are you going to do? Cower in fear? And this is why I keep telling people, express it to the fullest extent that you can without injuring the person beside you. But continue to educate, continue to tell your fellow citizens that life is worth living for. If it's worth living for, it's worth fighting for. But let's do it with respect to our fellow citizens as well. That's the best I can. God sake.